had something wrong with the live stream, and I was still playing the Awkward Devs, little intro video. So let's do this again. Welcome to Awkward Devs 108. People are still rolling in. I'm Tim, I'm your host, and we have a packed agenda today, so we can get right into it. First thing on the agenda is we have the Burden update go live on Robston and Gordy. I know that Rye had, or Basu had an update to give about the Robston fork. I don't think anything notable happened on the Gordy one. So yeah, maybe we can start with Basu giving you an update on Robston.
Yeah, sounds good. So we stopped importing on Robston at some point. We should have actually forked, but my bad, I misconfigured our miner. So we weren't actually mining. We are now. But yeah, we stopped importing on Robston, and it was because we hadn't fully removed all of the references to BLS 12. And so I kind of had two things to discuss based on this. One is just a general thing about testnet consensus issues. What are people's thoughts on postmortems for testnet consensus issues? Is this kind of below the threshold, or is there an expectation for clients to be, doing a write-up on this? For mainnet, it's obvious. If there's something like that, then we'll write a postmortem. But yeah, what are the community's expectations around testnet postmortems? And the other question I had is, when should we have tests for non-inclusion of something? Clearly with 2315, it was last minute enough that we thought it was important to have tests for non-inclusion. And with BLS 12, we didn't have any tests for non-inclusion. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, if you're on the call, but I think Nethermind also had to pull it out kind of last minute. So this could be a potential issue in the future. So yeah, those are the two things that I want to talk about.
Yeah, I remember that we deployed BLS 12 and only removed it together with 2315, and yeah, we didn't notice with any tests that were there at that times.
I think it's tricky because the set of things that are not in a fork is infinite, and so we need to find a line to draw.
I think we just need one test that will say that whatever goes to the addresses that are after the latest precompile address for the next one. So if the last precompile is 15, if we test precompile 16, if it actually uses, if it uses no gas at all, then.
So that works. That works, but that's just for precompiles. I was hoping for maybe a more general rule, like, okay, if we had reference tests for this and then it gets pulled out, we should have reference tests against it. And that kind of helps solve Micah's issue of like, okay, well, obviously the set is infinite of the things we don't have there. So where do we draw the line and like, what do we test?
I think the simplest thing is when you have tests that do test for the presence of it, run the same test one fork back. We should all fail the same way.
How often do we expect to pull back AIPs?
Actually, this actually happened on mainnet, or either mainnet or one of the testnets where Parity had implemented that zero signature transaction thing and managed to enable it on mainnet and had to do a panic new release. So there is some historical precedence about this happening. So my position is we should, in general, yes, we should try to cover these cases as well. But I don't know if we can make any definite line when and where.
I think all opcodes have the tests for non-inclusion, as it's just the precompiles that do not have it, and anything outside like networking, transaction formats, as Martin suggested. So this is a bit harder to detect. But any opcodes being switched on or off, we can detect it, and I think we have tests for it already. Like there is a bad opcode test within the blockchain test that verifies for every single fork if the opcodes that shouldn't be there are not there, and if they return the invalid opcode. So 2315 is included automatically within that test because it says.
Actually, that's not quite true, because if you check for invalid opcodes, the thing with 2315 is that you also need to have the stack stuff right. So even if you have it implemented, if you just do a jump sub, it will fail, looking just like it would have looked if you hadn't included it. So yeah, you don't get full coverage on those types of tests. You need to kind of actually know what it is you want to check for that is not included in order to do it properly.
So maybe we should just create a note that in whatever process we create for when we're doing removing, that this should be something that's addressed, like what reverse test should happen. We should just make sure we have the conversation about it every time.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable.
So Thomas asked a question. I just want to answer. No, it wouldn't return. There's no consensus on like what the error is. I mean, it either works or it goes out of gas. But there's no like consensus observable that this was that type of error or this type of error.
Yes, but the opcode, there is always at least one test for the opcode not failing for any change that includes the opcode. So it will automatically fail for any fork where we do not switch on that functionality.
And a thought on the postmortem, I would say it should be up to the client implementing teams if they need one, and like they should just figure out if it's something that would be valuable to other teams or their own team, and that just kind of depends on the situation and what the bug was.
I mean, with postmortems, it's also partially the reason you do them is an expectation from others that they will be there. So what I'm trying to suss out is like the expectation around the testnet. Like, are we seeing it as like, oh, okay, well, testnet consensus issues happen. That's partially what this rollout is designed for. So you don't need to do that. Or is the argument like, well, no, there are users on it, so do the postmortem. So basically what I'm asking is like, from people from other client teams, what would you do if you had a testnet consensus issue? Would you do a postmortem or not?
Yes, probably would.
I think the silence means everybody else doesn't want to admit that they would not.
So I guess, it'll be like a nice to have, like we maybe should not force people to do it, but I think it is valuable for the community to see it, and obviously for other client teams, and just for like historical, keeping track of what happened. Yeah.
And it's probably more important sometimes than others too. So that's just like depending on what the error ends up being.
Yeah, it depends of what kind of consensus issue, and depending on what kind, it will depend when we are going to basically release postmortem. Generally speaking, postmortem is something like explanation what's happened, and I think everybody would benefit from that.
Okay, I'm happy with it depends. You feel like it was a useful question to ask.
Cool. Anything else on the Robston fork? I think that was the only thing that came up. And go ahead.
Definitely a useful question, right? Because all these things like suss out some of the stuff that hasn't been formalized. So don't take a silence as like it wasn't a good thing, because it was definitely good to just get out.
Silence means
For
no
Open
objection.
Ethereum side, Open Ethereum side for Robston, we found one bug related to the Rust version, and our Docker images was built with all the Rust, and we recompiled that Docker images, and we are fine. That was one hiccup on the Open Ethereum side regarding Robston.
Cool. Anything else from any of the other teams? Okay. And for Gordy, it seemed to go smoothly, but anything come up there? Okay.
No, our validator is fine. Robston, Gurley both fine, so we didn't see any problems.
Yeah, also notably all validators were upgraded just in time. So with the Besu fix deployed before the Gurley fork, there were no issues. Also none that I have seen.
And have we triggered at least like minimal versions of all the features on one or the other testnet?
I don't think we did.
Well, we must have triggered at least something on Robston for Besu to break, right?
Robson was a fat finger. That was somebody trying to do Uniswap withdrawal on Robston, and they got the call wrong. So that was lucky there for the most part. I have seen that there have been access list calls invoking access lists on Robston, so that feature has been exercised, both empty access lists and normal access lists. I haven't looked for any of the other specific calls related to the features.
I was thinking in the past of that testing method where apart from the standard test that we run outside of chain, that we can also always after the fork execute those features as transactions, as test transactions on every single testnet. But obviously it requires some work from us.
Yeah, I guess what is the hard part? Is it automating? I guess you need kind of the same accounts across all the networks that you can automate sending all these transactions from.
Are you asking why can't we just rerun the same test suite?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, what test suite?
So the standard test suite of the blockchain tests usually goes by setting up some state and then verifying the changes to that state. You cannot just send it to the network.
Exactly. Yeah, so there would have to be quite a lot of pre-work to actually set up the state in the way we want it for the test.
So I was thinking about the set of tests when instead of requesting some specific behavior, we just prepare a set of transactions that use the thing, but but the test set itself doesn't say what should happen. And just what should happen is that all the clients together should behave the same, and we can detect if there is any break, which means that we have a set of transactions that we generate that verify every single potential thing that we can think of.
So something I did for Robston is I just took some of the old transactions and resent them with access lists. I think those are the transactions that Dennis saw. So I think around 10,000 or 100,000 transactions or something that were just like old transactions from Robston. But yeah, in the future we could have some more meaningful transactions that actually like touch the code that we want to test.
Yeah, anyway, as I see it, we have testnets where like YOLO, we can send whatever and we have infinite funds and we can do whatever kind of test cases, synthetic test cases we want. And the goal of having the Robston and Rinkeby is to see the like actual near mainnet usage in the more complex scenarios with everything that user does and don't do. So I don't know if it is worth deploying the synthetic tests on Robston if we already tested that on some earlier testing.
Got it. And in that case, I guess the value is like having almost like as much time as possible on the testnet so that people just use it and we see what they do basically.
Right. I mean, the YOLO ones, they don't have to live very long.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, the public testnets.
Per week, and we. Exactly.
Prior to Robston, do we have any proof of work test networks, like any of the YOLO test networks proof of work?
Nope.
Or is Robston the only place that we test anything proof of work until mainnet?
Yes.
Yep.
That would be the only argument I could think of for doing something special on, like something above and beyond on Robston. Otherwise, I agree with what Martin said.
Yeah, we don't bring any changes that are related to proof of work or click, so it's not like it's important in this particular case, unless we change difficulty behavior like we will do in London. But we should have absolute confidence to generate any synthetic tests on Robston now, so it's not like there is risk. We should all feel totally fine to generate any random transactions.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And I guess there's the Rinkeby fork happening next week on the 24th. Is there anything we want to do kind of after the Rinkeby fork before the mainnet fork? We'll have like 2-3 weeks. Yeah. Is there anything we want to do there, or just kind of look at regular usage?
Advertising with community to test, show them what they can use, how the access lists work, encourage them to experiment with access lists. That would be great testing.
Okay.
Prepare people to understand what tooling they can use and how they need to change their tools.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, I can follow up on that. Yeah.
That may be a hard sell, since I don't think it might be a hard sell because I don't think anyone actually cares about access lists. I mean, they exist basically to give an out to the set of contracts that may break, and we don't even know if any of those are like real things that people care about, or those, like, we know like it's what 3% of the things that Martin tested broke, but those might just be defunct contracts that no one touches.
So the design of access list provides gas savings for everyone who uses it, based on what I read in the design, which means that practically everyone can benefit from access lists, and it's a bit of a nudge towards the state.
I thought it didn't decrease gas costs, like specifically.
So the way that the IP 2929 and 2930 work is that there's a gas cost of 2100 or 2600 if you access something dynamically. But if you pre-declared it an access list, it goes down to 1900 or 2400. And the longer term case for moving more people onto using access lists is that access lists allow us to do database accesses in parallel instead of doing them in series, which could potentially increase yield.
Am I incorrect that for most users, the gas costs will not actually change if they use an access list or not?
Yeah,
no, if they use an access list, then every cold read will cost 200 gas less. So right now it's very small, but it does exist.
Okay, that was my mistake.
Yeah, to making it clear to community, actually, if they start using access lists, they'll see gas savings.
Okay, yeah, I'll follow up on that and look up at what tools and whatnot they can use and how we can announce it. Yeah, next week. Is there anything else on Berlin that people wanted to bring up? Otherwise, we can move on to the other parts. Okay. So I guess, yeah, just to give some background on kind of the rest of the agenda, which was pretty massive. Last call, we accepted 1559 and the difficulty bomb pushback into London. There's a couple EAPs that are directly related to 1559. So the gas refund stuff where there's different EAPs, the base fee opcode, Michael, who's joining on the call, has a proposal from the mining community to change the block reward if we were to see issues with the hash rate on the network. And then finally, there's a proposal to bring back the hard-coded block gas limit, which was originally part of 1559 but got removed. So all of these are kind of very closely related to London, and I think it makes sense to try and get to a decision on them sooner rather than later. And then there were another set of discussions around what should the scope of London be, given that it's happening quite soon because of the difficulty bomb, and similarly, what should the scope of Shanghai be? There were some conversations on that. I'm not sure how much we can get through on this call, but I think at the very least, if we can kind of resolve the London stuff, that'll be good because we can start actually implementing that and testing it. Yeah, so just a general context. And then at the end of the agenda, there was a lot of different EAPs that weren't related to London or to the stuff already in London. But I think it makes sense to kind of go through the stuff that's directly related to see how big London already is before we make decisions about anything else. And then the first one in those, so we started this on the last call. We only had 2 minutes to discuss it, so we didn't get into a lot of depth, was all the different alternatives with regards to removing the refunds from S-Store and self-destruct. So Vitalik had an original EIP 3298, and then I forget, William had 2 counter proposals, and then Vitalik put up yet another proposal this week, EIP 3403. So I guess it makes sense, either Vitalik or William, if you want to give just like a quick overview of what your EAPs are and what the goal is here.
I'm happy to start. So EIP 3298 was a very simple, bare bones kind of removal of all refunds. So including the self-destruct refunds and also including the refunds for S-Store clearing. There were some concerns mentioned in response to EIP 3298. So one of those concerns was that it would make a lot of use cases that go 0 to non-zero to 0 and kind of needlessly much more expensive. So one of those is mutex locks. So where contracts kind of flip a bit in storage before they make a call so that when execution happens inside of the inner call, it can't re-enter the original contract. And the second is ERC20, approve and spend within a single transaction, where the storage slot that represents the approved amount starts off 0, then switches to something non-zero, and then switches right back to 0. And my proposal for both of that tries to at least address those concerns is to do a more restricted removal of refunds, where refunds stay in the one case where the original storage slot is 0, the current value is non-zero, and the new value is also 0, right? So now the reasoning behind this more restricted approach is that it still satisfies 2 of the key goals of EIP 3298. So the one key goal is that it allows us, it preserves the kind of it also creates the invariance that the amount of gas execution has to actually be bounded by the block gas limit. Basically, because every 15,000 gas refund is kind of mapped to a 15,000 gas extra that was spent just to fill the slot. And so like basically the only gas that refunds can cancel is gas used within the same transaction that was used not for storage clear or not for execution, but for storage filling. So from a kind of DOS and execution time variance mitigation perspective, it still achieves their goals. And also it manages to make gas tokens non-viable because it's only like refunds can only refund gas that was spent to fill the exact same storage slot. So you can't use storage slots as a battery anymore. So yeah, that's EIP 3403.
Would it be correct to say that you are currently lobbying for 3403 and not 3298?
I definitely favor 3403 over 3298 at the moment. I think like in the much longer term, we should probably do further cleanups. But I feel like for London, like 3403 is just the minimal thing that achieves their goal.
William, I see. Yeah, you have your hand up, and you are the author of the two kind of other EAPs. So yeah, if you want to take a few minutes to give some background on that.
Yes, I'm currently supporting 3322, which is the explicit gas storage EIP. This has been proposed in the past. Both 3322 and 3403 fix gas token viability, at least as gas tokens currently are. The crux seems to be whether or not block elasticity from refunds is good or harmful. 1559 can make 2x, while refunds also already make 2x. But 1559 elasticity is strictly less than refund elasticity because it is bound by increases in the base fee, while the liquid refunds the liquid refund supply bounds the gas token elasticity. If we replaced refund elasticity with only base fee elasticity, we would see more congestion during peaks because having both is better. We'll need a lot more than 2x capacity during those peaks anyway. As discussed at the end of the last call, the network should be operating well below 4x capacity to ensure nodes can sync. DOS, on the other hand, is a problem of badly mispriced opcodes. DOS is usually the reason that 4x is considered bad. But the first opcode repricing from 150 followed a DOS event in 2016. But the opcodes changed by a lot more than 2x. Call was changed by 17.5%, balanced by 20x. EXT code 35x, and self-destruct went from 0 to non-zero. Refund elasticity has never caused such a problem and never will, not even on 4x. The urgency of refund changes seems to be originate around perceived gas token storage bloat, but the supply of gas tokens has actually declined more than 50% in the last 3 months. Empty blockchains are having a much bigger problem with this than Ethereum. Despite only existing for about a month, there's already 40 times more chi on Binance Smart Chain than on Ethereum. I think removing refunds will bloat the state a lot more in the long run. Despite 4203's handling of one case, there'd be no incentive to zero out token balances and allowances in most cases due to the 20,000 cost of S-Store set. When wallets and protocols build for an EVM without refunds, the state will grow much faster than ever before. But I believe the bloat is addressed by 3322. By providing a more efficient alternative, we can expect to supplant the current inefficiency and waste with explicit gas storage. Thank you.
Technical question. I don't really get it. Is there supposed to be a gas refund counter in the state of an account?
Yes, 3322 proposes to put a gas token counter in the account, though one alternative might be a built-in precompiled as an ERC20 that would store this.
Do you expect that it will lead to lower volatility of the gas price, because like people will now have easier mechanism to explicitly store the gas into the account?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, 3322 is, I mean, maybe you think it's small, but it's in fact extremely large because it touches the consensus encoding of an account in the trie. Even if I supported it, which I don't, I think it will be totally out of scope for London.
I concur.
Can it be merged with a proposal from AXIC to limit the account nonce, so that we have now
the proposal from AXIC
24 bytes pre-usable space, something like this?
The proposal from AXIC about limiting the account nonce is a no-op, because the account nonce will never go above 64, even 64 anyway, on mainnet.
Yeah. So, but there is something like, well, it's still 32 bytes in the storage.
I think it's
as far as I
Isn't it
remember.
RLP encoded?
Yep.
I think it's RLP encoded, so we strip off those 0 bytes already.
Yes,
more or less.
That is
Oh,
correct.
okay.
Just before we get in the weeds, I see Thomas and Piper have their hands up. Do either of you want to go?
Yeah. So generally, I don't think it's something bad about this 3302 proposed driven gas token. I always consider those solutions to be actually quite interesting and good response to the market volatility around gas prices. I definitely think that it's not a good idea to just push it straight away with London because of its complexity. I would love us to look a bit more at this, but also would like to ask for a bit more up-to-date and detailed analysis of the actual numbers, because some of those numbers were set here with a lot of confidence, but I seemed to be referring to the very old events, maybe not that relevant. So it'd be great to refresh that and prepare a better, clear motivation for the subcode. Also, in a way, those markets were created in response to how protocol behaved, and now we suggest of changing the protocol to support those markets. So it's the other way around approach. So we have to understand that this motivation is still relevant, and EIP 1559 does introduce this like short-term capacity burst solutions. So they would serve similar thing. We have to analyze it further.
Piper?
Yes. So, William, one of the things that you said in there seemed to hinge on the idea that by removing refunds, we will be removing incentives to clear state and thus causing state bloat to be a bigger problem. And I want to push back on this concept because I don't think that refunds and state clearing incentives have actually, I don't have numbers to back this up, but I do not think that those incentives have actually resulted in any significant reduction in state bloat or improvement in people clearing state. And right now, the direction that we're looking at for protocol development is basically to say, not clearing the state isn't a problem because we're looking at expiring cold state. So I think that under that model, keeping refunds doesn't actually make sense because we're not looking at a mechanism that's effective at reducing state bloat anyways. So I just wanted to push back on that specific point. Yeah, that's it.
I
concur.
A response to that.
I concur with this.
Just to briefly mention one more point there, I do think it is like I think it seems like all people agree that this is just too early in the process to be considered for London. But like I think more long term, it is interesting just to think about like the gas limit serving like of course this dual purpose of kind of like limiting the processing time for blocks, but then also limiting the state growth. And of course, ideally those should be like like both at the same kind of like limiting size, but as long as they aren't, I think something like this proposal that would shift kind of like throughput towards the times of higher demand would make sense where the limiting factor is the purely the state growth, right? Because then the state growth on average still is the same. Whereas if the limiting factor is the block processing times, then of course like a proposal like this just doesn't make sense at all. So just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, but just one more kind of comment on long-term economics in the context of at least the current proposed state expiry roadmaps. One kind of important technical nuance of these approaches is that it will actually likely not be possible to have a concept of setting a storage slot back to being empty. Like basically, the reason being that in the context of these storage or state expiry revamps, a storage slot being empty is just assumed by the mechanism to mean that that storage slot had not been accessed yet. And so you should go check in earlier state trees to see what the most recent value was. And so what's going to have to happen is that we'll need to have basically emptiness and zero be represented by different values. And when that happens, like I think removing refunds completely will be okay because these 0 to 1 to 0 use cases, like basically as soon as something has gone away from being 0 once, that storage slot is turned on, and then everything after that is just modifying an existing storage slot. But like basically just because of that, there would be no, like, not only would it would be superfluous to add extra incentives to clear storage, but it would actually be useless.
Okay, so as to the point about storage currently not being incentivized enough, or perhaps it not being effective, I would counter that it's effective at encouraging inter-transaction 0 to 1, 1 to 0 behavior and design at the top level. When protocols design this in interfaces, they're more likely to encourage, for example, users to approve exactly the amount that they're going to need rather than infinite. And the difference is that you will always have this approval in this case, but it could be a balance or any other kind of storage, just because there's no reason to remove it if you're accessing it between different transactions. Since the incentive is there, you're more likely to build it that way, and the incentive is important for that reason. If, as Vitalik and another mentioned, in the future, there's actually no benefit to removing storage, and they'll just be removed anyway, then I can see a world in which we wouldn't want refunds because it would be complex, and we already have some other complexity addressing the issue, but that's in a future that is not London. Thank you.
Yeah, Artem, I think you've been waiting for a while to speak.
Yes, I think of these 4 proposals, the original one, 3298, is the simplest and the most straightforward. Therefore, we should just go with it.
Thanks. Denkrad, Alex, anything you want to add?
I wanted to add to the economic argument, like of smoothing, like long-term gas long-term. I think like actually EIP 1559 will already do a better job at that because it allows gas futures and options markets. And I think we should rely on that rather than on trying to transfer stored gas into the future.
Thanks. And Alex? Oh, I see you put your hand down. So I guess there's a few comments in the chat and what people have. Oh, sorry, Alex.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I wanted to get a clarification from Vitalik that if later on with the state rent mechanism or like state purification, empty slot and explicit 0 will be encoded differently. Like, is it expected that having like more empty slot and not having to take care or history of 0 slots will give some benefits to users, or any estimate in this direction?
Not sure I understand the question well. Like the point of that entire mechanism is to have state expire automatically if it doesn't get touched in some period of time, like a year. And so like,
It's about that if I have a lot of state cells which are 0, that I ideally wouldn't want to care about them.
Right.
Kind of.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
If it wasn't worked on, then it's fine. But I think maybe then having empty slot and 0 slot being the same may be beneficial.
No, the reason why they have to be different just has to do with these kind of really subtle nuances where, like, if in the past the most recent value of some storage slot was 5, but then you change it to 0, then like the fact that it was changed to 0 has to be stored, because if the fact that it was changed to 0 was not stored, then the system would kind of walk back to the most recent value, and so it would think the storage value is still.
Okay, well, yeah. Proving emptiness is the same as proving non-existence in this case. Yeah, sure.
So just to take a step back here, like it seems, I guess, as I understand it, William, you're kind of advocating for your 3332 proposal over the other one you had, Vitalik for the 3403, even though it's a bit more complex than the original 3298 one. I guess maybe just like on the client side, does anybody feel like 3322 could be realistically done for London? And yeah, let's start there, because that seemed to be the general feeling that no.
Yeah, I would say no. Yeah, regarding the complexity of 3403, I implemented it yesterday, and I posted on the Allcordev chat a table summarizing the changes for some particular scenarios. And of course, yes, 3298 is a bit more trivial, but 3403 is still trivial to implement.
And does 3403 prevent us from doing 3322 in the future if we wanted to?
It does not.
Yeah, 3403 I think is forward compatible with everything.
Oh, and Mika, you have your hand up.
Does any client's opinion change at all for 3322 if it was moved to a precompile instead of an opcode for the storage, or sorry, instead of the account? So where the data is stored, is that the critical piece, or is it other bits?
So if we want to make a drastic, a pretty large change in what kind of data we store for an account, I can think of more valuable things to use that mechanism for than to have these gas playing games, personally.
Oh, that's right. Do we currently, no precompiles actually have storage? Is that correct? They're all pure.
Correct. They're all pure, yes.
Okay, so even if we moved to precompile, that would still potentially introduce complexity.
It will still need to be in a state somewhere. It will bubble up in a try or somewhere. Yeah, it's pretty large change.
So I guess that Get clearly feels it's a pretty large change. Thomas has echoed the same thing, and we could potentially do it for Shanghai. Does anyone kind of disagree with that, to like potentially considering it for a future fork, but not having it in London?
Yeah, I don't think we should even consider 3322 at all. And honestly, I think this is the prime example of like an illustration of what we discussed, that before EAPs can be considered, there should be a ready-made implementation for the major clients.
Okay. Fair enough. I guess, does anybody disagree with that? Not necessarily like the specific threshold, like I think that's a separate conversation, but just like about 3322.
I agree.
Okay. And Open Ethereum, any thoughts?
Yeah, we agree.
Okay.
Introducing new opcodes and introducing new state in the state tree seems like a big change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we're kind of down to 3298 and 3403. I'm curious, like Martin, you said 3403 was not too complicated to implement. Does anyone else have thoughts, I guess, on the client side between the two?
No, it seems simple. I think the only benefit of not going with 3403 is that the other one removes the refund entirely. So for any potential new implementations, it would make EVM simpler, but we can do that later if we decide to. So 3403 is better.
I can agree with that.
Vitalik, Mika, you both have your hands up. Any comments on that one?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give the kind of a long-term strategic comments that if we ever want to do changes to the account structure, then a good time to do that might be when we do the state expiry and statelessness changes, and we switch to Verkle trees, because with the switch to Verkle trees, we have the opportunity to move to a kind of pure key value and a single layer system, which would make it very easy to just kind of add on whatever new slots you want, because they're pretty much already, like, there's already.
Got it. So is there a consensus to bring 3403 into London then? And I guess on the previous call, we had consensus to bring something about refunds in London to help deal with the increased block size of 1559. It seems like people prefer 3403. Does anyone disagree with bringing 3403 into London?
I'm a big fan of 3403, though I'm not a fan of bringing it in for that particular reason. I am very unconvinced that we need it for London. I think it's an awesome thing to include, and I would love to have it. I don't think we need it for London with the introduction of 1559. I think 1559 going into London without this would be totally fine.
I agree with Micah.
Martin, did you say that you implemented this one and that it was relatively straightforward?
Yes, I posted on the on the old Cordev channel the commit for Geth, very small. I'd also like to mention, so there are two things. One is that I'm not sure if the actual we might want to modify the refund size in 3403 to make the 010 case identical to the 121 case, which is currently a bit cheaper. What was the other thing I want to mention is that currently we have a problem with the gas token problem is that any mining pool and a lot of miners fill their blocks with mining chai tokens and filling the state. We can fix that if we remove or make refunds not carrying across transaction and across blocks. And I think it was Peter, who is not on the call today, but he mentioned that if we're going to do 1559, we should / need to also do something about the refunds, because 1559 has these, you can temporarily have a lot more gas and block processing being performed during the block. And with refunds and refund burning, the effect will be even further magnified, which would be a security concern. So I think that's the kind of tie between 1559 and refunds.
Yeah, that's also.
Does Peter or you have data on that? Like, I've heard that argument made many times, but like every time we try to push on it, it's kind of it's very fuzzy. I would like to get much harder data personally.
I don't know what I mean. You can have double the block size, and you can also burn refunds. So
yeah, sorry. Yeah, the argument being that we are not currently constrained by block processing time. Like, that is not a real issue unless the average processing time goes up. And 1559 doesn't change the average processing time, and even gas tokens don't actually change the average processing time because they end up getting burned later in theory. Or sorry, let me rephrase that last part. Gas tokens change state growth, but the average state growth doesn't change because they're later burned. And processing time is basically the same as any other gas you spend. And so I'm not convinced that we need to care about individual blocks being up to 4x as big, because I don't think that's a real problem we have right now.
So there could, I don't know how I can explain that well, but if a client...
We don't have to do it on this call. I would just like, it comes up repeatedly. So I'd like to see something more solid at some point.
Right, and it's kind of hard to show, but in the code, in the Geth client, or I guess whatever client, there is a difference if you are executing 400 transactions or if you're executing 200 transactions. There is journaling there. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't really.
Okay. We can take this offline, but it's something that keeps coming up, and I would really like to see it handled or more addressed more thoroughly. So.
So I guess based on that, Thomas, you have a comment about saying that you would want to keep London clean with just 1559 in the difficulty bomb, and that maybe 3403 should be scheduled for Shanghai. I don't know. What do people feel is the next step here? Like, should we just try and have perhaps a breakout room or just an async conversation about the different approaches and decide if we want something in to London? And I suspect at this point, it's basically, do we want 3403 into London, right?
Right, and I guess the sub question of like what number the refunds should be set to,
yeah.
Because Martin mentioned, like
okay, so I guess maybe we can, and because the implementation is also quite small, as you said, Martin, I think it's not the end of the world if we decided on the next call to include 3403 into London. But what we can do is just have the maybe conversation async about what the impact is on clients of these blocks that are I guess 4 times as big, and you know, whether 3403 helps there, and the kind of additional complexity it adds to London. Does that make sense, or do people feel? I guess I don't feel like we have kind of enough consensus to make a decision now, but do people feel differently from that?
I think it'd be nice if we said we want to do 3403 and not the other ones, but whether it's London or Shanghai is an open question, and like narrow the scope of the discussion considerably.
Although I would say, just from a risk aversion point of view, I think it's better at least to think about the ERPs as like addressing a security concern. And so unless like we are completely certain that 4x block times are fine, I think the default should be that it's in London, unless within the next couple of weeks we are like absolutely convinced that it's not necessary, at which point it might still be a nice feature, but then it's a feature discussion. I think for now it should remain a security concern discussion.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that too.
This fits into the EVM graveyard category as well as just the direction that we want to go in general with the EVM, right?
It does. It's like both EVM graveyard and security.
So I guess maybe just
in
on the
that
security
context,
side,
I'm supportive of it since it's simple.
And on the security side, like obviously, Martin, you raised kind of some concerns. I'm curious, like, what do other clients feel? Is this also something you see as a security concern?
I feel is very close to what Ansgar is saying, and that we generally should. It would be a great success if we could define today that London is predefined as this 2 EIPs, the difficulty bomb and EIP 1559. And then maybe I would just change from what Ansgar suggested to default, by default have 3403. I would suggest by default not have it, but actually promise that we start working on it to analyze if it's needed for security, but as soon as that it comes in Shanghai, and only if it's really needed, then push it forward a bit.
So one other thing is that like this is going a bit further on into the agenda, but I think some of us wants to propose that Shanghai should be only the merge.
Yeah, and that is definitely another can of worms. So I guess, okay, let's maybe keep like thinking through 3403, whether I guess it's default in or default out doesn't make a big difference over the next 2 weeks. Because I suspect all the client teams anyway need to implement a bunch of other stuff for London. Like we're not at the point where we can set up a YOLO network. So yeah, I think it makes sense to like client is saying in the chat, make a decision about that on the next call, and just to move forward because we have a lot of kind of other EAPs to go over. Any final comments on that, or is everyone fine to move forward?
We could just move 3403 to considered for inclusion, and then that I think would be the way to formalize that.
Okay.
Let's get the EIP actually into an EIP. It's currently just an idea. It's not even a draft yet.
Okay, so let's get an EIP, move it to CFI.
So we don't run into. Yeah. So get the EIP finished. Like someone needs to finish writing it, and then once it actually is an EIP, then get it into review, then get it into CFI. So we don't end up with problems like we've had in the past with, things that are still just like ideas on a piece of napkin, and we're like, oh, it's a conservative conclusion.
Okay. Yeah, and we can definitely do that over the next 2 weeks, and then discuss it on the next call.
Yeah, it should only take like a day.
Okay. So next one, I think this one should be a bit quicker. Base fee opcode EIP 3198. Basically to add an opcode to query the base fee. There was some concerns that were brought in on the last call regarding it. Vitalik posted a comment in the issue to kind of address those. Basically that the opcode doesn't provide gas observability in the same way as looking at how much gas internal execution costs. It just shows you what was the minimum gas price of a block. Yeah, I don't know. Thomas, I see your hand is up. So any comments or?
Yeah, I think I would be both the person that would use it extensively in some projects, and also the person that knows that it's not critical to be introduced straight away. I'm like, it's a simple opcode, very basic, very needed. It doesn't introduce the gas observability about the gas progress. It's a different type. It's similar to the gas price opcode, which is the transaction environment or transaction context observability. We have lots of those, and they never caused any trouble really. And yeah, I'm like as few things as possible in London, just to make sure that London is simple. And this one should come straight after. And it's a very simple opcode, but even this would just be one more thing to think of.
I think this again overlaps with the discussion that is scheduled as the next big item on the agenda, the kind of the scoping for London and Shanghai, because if it turns out that Shanghai might be merge only and it might only arrive, let's say, late this year or early next year, then any new feature fork after London might be mid to late 2022. And so under such a scenario, I think something as simple as the base fee opcode might be nice to have before like the 24 months horizon.
Yeah, okay. So let's maybe come back to this one in the same way as 3403. The next one, so this one will probably be a bit longer again. So Michael Carter, aka Bitsby Trippin, is on the call. So basically, there's been a lot of conversations with miners about the impact of 1559, and Michael has been working on different kind of models with regards to miner revenue and how 1559 would impact that. And 3368 was his proposal that should potentially go alongside 1559, depending on the network conditions, I believe. So maybe it makes sense, Michael, for you to just take a few minutes to walk us through the proposal and I guess specifically the kind of scenarios you've considered and the one where you think this proposals would make the most sense.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity to talk briefly about it. And before I jumped in, I wanted to take about 10 seconds to, apologize to the Ethereum developers in the community over the last few weeks of the tension that was created around some of the language that was used when we talked to show of force around EIP 1559. As a miner and educator and becoming a participant, even well before Ethereum in 2011, I've been very passionate around the proof of work concepts and a mining advocate in the scene. I think that passion in this rare occasion caused a less than ideal message when it came to the risk of the fee burn if particular conditions occurred. When talking about the specific EIP, the first iteration, as I would call it, is just trying to address an existential risk that I believe is an unlikely scenario, but if we had a precipitous fall of price along with the yield burn, we would have a potential issue when it comes to the size of pie of the growth of, because of the success of Ethereum and the crypto ecosystem in general, has brought up a huge amount of participants. about 2.5 times what the current previous all-time high was when it comes to yield. Make no mistake, I know what this EIP looks like. It looks like a money printer goes brr. But I think at least from a conversation standpoint, we can look at a pragmatic approach when ensuring that all circumstances up into that merge, that we have ETH security as paramount. Having a solution, to address a large hash drop, not just because of market conditions. There's also a scenario that has, maybe a hybrid type of issue where you have another proof of work coin come in and start, peeling some of that dominance away, with the understanding that, ETH is moving to a place of proof of stake. That's a known state, right? I guess bottom line, the upfront inflation risk with a tell-off that brings the same emission over 2 years, given the the flip of moving the merge closer, probably isn't as tenable now, because it wouldn't have that same emission rate now over a 2-year period. I've also, not only is this optional, but there's also maybe a discussion that we can have. We'll take this obviously offline, but implementing something like MES, like the multiple exponential subjective scoring, or something else that allows and protects against any kind of reorg or double spend, which is the primary concern here. So if emission is just against the monetary policy, which makes complete sense, the formation of the CIP was to ensure that the emission grading would be the same amount of emission over a period of time, but in a shortened schedule. I understand that doesn't make sense. I'll open up to, the floor to see, some other tenable solutions that I have no problem at all helping to champion in this regard.
Thomas, yeah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I think that just the idea of starting the conversation around the block reward and how it binds to the Ethereum price fluctuation, Ether price fluctuation, it's relevant. I mean, it's important. However, I don't think that just by changing it to 3 or 4, or just defining any change now makes sense without understanding how you want to have it in the long term. Ideal solution would be binding the move of ETH price with the security payout in a block reward sense. I think the MEV solutions that enter the market now, the price of Ether provide a lot of payout to the security providers, to miners, and this doesn't seem necessary, but the conversation around it is necessary. And it's important to talk about it and to think, how are we prepared to act very quickly if the price happens to drop 10 times, for example? How do we quickly ensure that this excessive mining power that appears during the times of the high gas price is not used to just do the quick gain by attack on the network?
Mika?
Am I correct in understanding, Michael, that this proposal is you want to have it ready in case there's a problem, but if everything stays exactly as it is, you do not believe it is necessary today? Like, if we were to do London tomorrow, you don't think it's necessary, but you think that we should be prepared if the environment changes by July. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the modeling that was done, even rudimentary as it was, it took effectively 10 different scenarios, 3 of which started to create an instance where you could have a precipitous drop. And so in the unlikeliness of it happening, having it to go in mandatory, I think is premature. I don't think that it makes any sense at all, to be honest with you. But it is about having the fact that Ethash in general is not protected against this type of situation, and the scripts and the know-how on how to implement has been proven in the system. And it's really just a stop guard, and to have something because of this process of going through and how quick could the community react if this was to occur like over a week period. What's the flash to bang, and having something in the back pocket that could be implemented I think is pivotal, especially as we start to get up to the merge.
James?
In the context of having it ready, if something was to happen, I'd say like reducing the year decay to like a year, the time decay, and then also noting that the value might need to be different depending on the actual event that happens. But it's a good option. It's good to think these things through now and have the option when we need it ready.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Like Michael, we've talked a bunch over the past week, and I think my view on it as someone who's worked on 1559 over the past year is obviously there's a ton of things that could go wrong. The network could get attacked and stuff like that, and I'm personally not in favor of pre-committing to a specific solution. I think if something goes wrong, then different problems have different types of solutions. Like the case for miners, obviously there's not enough hash rate on the network. A simple solution there is increasing the block reward. But if something else goes wrong, then there's a different solution to that problem. So I think it makes sense to generally keep in our back pocket. Yeah. I don't know, Alex, Thomas, you also have comments? Or Danny, I see you coming on and off mute.
I would like to clarify for understanding of the claim that the mining power, like which has increased during the bull runs and high gas prices, can be later on used to attack the network in case if the Ethereum price goes down and gas prices go down. Now, when at least I'm not aware of any highly popular coins with ETH and with most of the mining power now coming from ASICs, what would be a logical reason for you to take your ASIC, which maybe doesn't work and not used right now, and use it to decrease the value of something which you could have earned with this ASIC, but you don't do right now? So it will be it can only be used by someone from outside of the network. And then it's kind of looks like the same probability can happen in any case.
Yeah, I think that's why we should be having this conversation. I still believe that we are very, very safe at this stage. And also, we have a much, much simpler tool than this EAP that is proposed. It's just changing the reward without any long-term decay or anything. It's something that we can introduce very quickly. I believe the difficulty of such a change is even lower than changing the difficulty bump numbers. It's one-line change, very easy, testable, can be agreed on very quickly and introduced to the network probably within 2 or 3 weeks with all the agreements. It might be slightly too slow for the economic reaction, but at the same time, we don't expect these changes to be that drastic. So I think we have tools. We should have conversation, but we have tools. It's not like we are totally unprepared. We have some tools now, and they are simpler and faster to be introduced than the one here, which makes assumption about the long-term behavior. Like it makes assumption that it's important to increase that now, and then it should be decaying to the previous number. And that decay, I don't think is justified by anything else than trying to make the CAP to look a bit less less permanent, and so be accepted more likely.
Cool. And Danny?
I'd say, first of all, I don't think that it's probably good for a blockchain protocol in the long run to be manually manipulating kind of monetary policy over and over again. I think that's probably really easy to be captured. I think there is a little bit of a precedent here because of the block reward reductions and because we are moving to proof of stake, which is fundamentally modifying that policy. But I think in the long term, I don't think it's a healthy kind of path to go down. But that said, for this particular in these types of proposals, like kind of a reactionary proposal to increase block rewards in the event of an attack or in the event of price drop. I think that it's probably naive to assume that doing that type of manual work on the protocol would not have an impact or potentially have an impact on price. I don't think you can isolate it and say, okay, Ether's worth $100 right now, we can increase the block reward by 10x and think that that isn't going to have any sort of tangible impact on price. I think that obviously price, value, and the relationships between those things, the relationships between we do and things that other people in the community do is not known. But I don't think that, I think that you could have a negative impact there. And so you could even backfire by increasing block rewards and potentially having, creating FUD and that kind of stuff. So it might actually backfire with respect to security. Just something to think about. I would say though, don't make a habit out of meddling with monetary policy and get to proof of stake and kind of have stability.
Thanks. And yeah, Michael, I see your hand is up again. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll first start with Danny. I actually agree with you, Danny. I think that to any kind of adjustment in reward and the incentive, I think has a weird effect on how it can affect price, not in such a linear way that it could be driven by news or anything like that, and would have potentially the risk of effect on that. When getting this proposal put together, having that emission schedule to be the same amount of emission was to try to address, if there was a precipitous drop, that it could, elevate enough that kept the this, I wouldn't call it the status quo, but about where the network has been over the last 12 months. When you look at not just peak times, but just the average block reward where it's been around a little over 3, and you can run that back since May. And so that's where the 3 came from. And then the tailing off of that, as we got to emerge, was to ensure that, if it took it gave a 2-year window, if that needed to move, it was, it could do that. I think understanding not just the reaction from the community, but just in general, when we mess with monetary policy, there may be other better approaches when it comes to addressing the security issue, and just take, some of the lessons learned from some of the other networks where they've had to really deal with this, like with regards to they've had impacts. So that, if this is too untenable, from a protection standpoint, having maybe a corresponding EIP that's in the thread, such as MESS or deep gravity well, or something that allows a protection, as it were, to a reorg, may be more tenable to it, and it addresses the issue. But yeah, we can take that one offline.
So I guess just in the interest of time to kind of summarize, I think everybody agrees if there's a problem, we should consider addressing it. Obviously, there's kind of disagreement about what the best way is and what the second order effects are of doing such a thing. It seems to me like nobody's advocating to put 3368 into London as is. So I just want to state that clearly, because I know a lot of people are watching and kind of try to interpret the decisions out of this. So does anyone disagree with this, that, we can obviously address any problem with 1559 once it comes up? Issuance is, one potential solution, which might have unintended consequences, and that for now we can keep London as is with regards to 1559. And I will take silence as agreement. The last thing, hopefully we can do this in just a few minutes and keep kind of 10 minutes for the whole Shanghai merge discussion. But the last kind of 1559 related concern for London is the idea around hard coding the block gas limit. So the original spec of 1559 hard coded the block gas limit. At the time it was 8 million and up to a 2x of 16 million. over the last year, as we worked on 1559, we removed that part of the spec, so to leave the block limit under 1559 controlled by miners as it is today. The main reason for that was just separation of concerns. 1559 was already a big change, and this seemed like a kind of somewhat unrelated change to bring in the same EAP. Then over the past few weeks, there's been some conversations about some potential concerns where under 1559, if miners get a tip to compensate for their uncle risk and their node operations, then their incentives to grow the block size increase, because if all the miners' nodes are more expensive to run, then the tips will just go up and they'll be compensated, but most other participants of the network will not be. So there was an EAP put together again this week, as Micah would say, kind of a back of the envelope idea, which basically brings back the idea of hard coding the block gas limit alongside 1559, mostly to avoid the scenario where like miners are overly incentivized to grow the block size. And I think Phil from Horizon Labs was the author of it, but Light Client wanted to discuss it on the call quickly. So do you want to give a quick overview, and then we can take comments?
I think, the title really basically says it all. It's just setting the block gas limit to a hard-coded value. It should be backwards compatible. We're not going to remove it from the block header. It's just going to remove the ability and the consensus logic for the gas limit to go up and down. I think the fraction is 1024. So that's about 0.1% per block. So it just removes that, and it requires every block to have the gas limit set to 12.5 million.
Thomas, I think you had your hand up first.
I think we historically never seen any bad action from miners on this parameter. And on the other way, we've seen actually very helpful cooperation on this number during the Shanghai attacks, I believe. I may be wrong here, but the gas limit was brought down just to make the network much safer in the short term. Also, this introduces a fine balance between the all-core devs and miners. So just any other conversation with this single parameter being untouched is much more balanced, because it says miners can react to the very adversary conditions when they detect those. And we have to stay aware of it, and we have to understand it, that there is this one parameter that they may change to protect against some network events. And so I would be actually strongly opposing this change and would prefer to leave it in the hand of miners.
I was actually about to say exactly the same thing. I think miners have historically done an excellent job of governing the gas limit. And also, I think the portion of the tips that would not go down with a higher gas limit is fairly small. So just economically, that incentive doesn't seem to me to be too huge.
May I remind you that miners also run nodes, and if miners are able to process larger blocks, then we should let them. The network should scale at the first possible opportunity, because decentralization and everything is good, but 100% bucks gas fees are not, and they are much worse for the network.
Michael, I think you had your hand up next, and then Danny.
That was left up from the previous conversation.
No worries. Danny?
Yeah, I'd just say the miner is a different type of economic actor on the network. Obviously, they can afford to have much more robust machines. Miners could even have very, very sophisticated machines. And so this parameter isn't only tuned for that type of participant. I don't think we should forget that. I will say, though, the threat of removing it is something that we can kind of keep in our back pocket, and maybe removing it doesn't really need to happen today, unless it were abused.
And one comment on that, I assume this also could be removed by a soft fork, right? Like, because in the case where miners abuse it, obviously they won't upgrade to a new hard fork, which removes it. But we could have all the other nodes on the network refuse blocks beyond a certain size, and that could be done basically without miners' support, right? Like, so if there was a case where we needed to deploy this as kind of a response, contrarily to like a bunch of other changes, we don't necessarily need miners to adopt it. Yeah. James, Artem?
I
sorry,
think
I just had raised my hand up.
Okay, cool. That it's true that miners have been great and they're so far, and I agree with Vitalik's point, and I do like in general that over time shoring up the incentives and promises for the network makes sense, and that the people who most understand the nuances of state growth and those things should really be the ones that are deciding this until that's no longer a problem. And so I would say we should go with some kind of block limit, but maybe it doesn't need to be for London, and just a general idea.
Actually, those same people who understand the best, they also drown in the awkward devs bureaucracy. And given that all our the nearest hard forks are reserved for like E1559 or the merge, we will never get the chance to increase the hard cap.
So I guess just this was originally brought up as kind of a security concern related to 1559. Does anyone feel strongly that this should come in 1559 in London alongside 1559 to kind of address a security issue? And I think if no one feels strongly about that, maybe it makes sense to just have the next 5 minutes for the merge conversation. Okay, so not included alongside 1559 for now in London. So we just have 6 minutes left. I don't think we can resolve this, but I think there's been a lot of conversations about Shanghai and the merge. So to kind of summarize quickly, we've wanted to keep London kind of lean in terms of an upgrade for a few reasons. The first is that 1559 is already a pretty huge change. And the second is that it is going to have to be done quickly in parallel to the Berlin work, which is the first time we've done this. So every extra bit of complexity we add in London is kind of has a fairly high cost. So I think it was right after the last call, Thomas proposed that we should just start having planning for Shanghai kind of soon, so that if we have good ideas, we can kind of move them to Shanghai right now and kind of free up London for 1559 and have Shanghai happen shortly after. In parallel to that, over the past week or two, there's been a lot of conversations about the state of the ETH1 to ETH2 merge, and Vitalik has put up a proposal where we could have a greatly simplified merge that would still require a fairly large amount of work on the ETH1 side. So another approach is to have London be the last kind of feature fork, and then to have the awkward devs attention kind of exclusively focused on the merged after London. So I'll stop here. I see a bunch of people already have their hands up. Thomas, I think you were first, and then Danny.
Yeah, so my proposition was since we see some simple EIPs that would be very proper for London, but we want to make sure that London has no delay at all. So I'm suggesting London for July, and then a bit faster forks than we usually would do. So suggesting Shanghai for October with anything that naturally comes to accompany London changes. So 3403, refund, remove, base fee, and whatever else would be suggested. And then suggest Cancun to follow very quickly in January for the merge.
And yeah, I see Danny and Mikhail, you both have your hands up, so I don't know if you want to give some context on the merge side.
Yeah, and both of us can speak a bit to it. So, I mean, the promise of V2, the promise of what the beacon chain is doing is threefold, to make the protocol more secure, sustainable, and scalable. There's kind of the prioritization, just moving the existing Ethereum network from proof of work to proof of stake satisfies the first two of those, making it a more sustainable protocol from a carbon footprint standpoint, as well as a more secure protocol due to some of the properties of proof of stake. Whereas if we did sharding first, you bring scalability to the beacon chain, but you don't really bring scalability native to Ethereum proper at that point. And so from a prioritization standpoint, I think there's much buy-in to do merge first, but I don't think that's necessarily what we're debating here. I would also argue that bringing kind of the promise of proof of stake and the sustainability and security is likely, I think we could say, a much higher priority than anything we could get into Shanghai. And that would be my prime argument for kind of once London is shipped, or once London releases are shipped, kind of doubling, tripling down on engineering efforts and digging in. I know, you know, some people say there's no way we could do it this year. Some people say, I think, you know, there's enough in that chain set, in that minimal version, that we could actually ship this year. And you know, in terms of prioritization, obviously we could ship a small Shanghai fork and work in parallel to that. But I think anything that we do and attempt to prioritize that isn't the merge would likely lead to some amount of delay in that. And so I would definitely argue for all hands on deck and get it done. I think it's kind of one of the core mandates of Ethereum at this point to get that merge done.
Yeah, so Danny said pretty much what I was going to say, but I can add that with the simplification that we have now, the merge can be much easier thing to reason about, and we have like the scope is pretty much understood as well. And yeah, since the proof of stake has been announced like from the very beginning, and since we have this clear path to the merge, makes a lot of sense to focus on that. And also one thing I would like to add here is that with bringing the execution to the beacon chain rather than to the shard chain, the merge becomes independent from sharding, which it used to be before when we discussed like phase 1 and phase 1.5. So since we like have all this on the table, I think it makes a lot of sense to pursue a merge after London.
So there's a ton of hands. I'll go ahead. Ansgar and Mika.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to basically agree what's been said. Primarily, also to point out that basically from the merge research side, I think at least my understanding is that it looks like one of the limiting factors of like basically time to merge really is client, like ETH1 client attention, basically. And so at least it looks like right now that whatever focus we can shift to on like the merge earlier, that gets us to the merge just so much earlier. And so I don't think like any kind of commitment to Shanghai as the merge would preclude that if like a month or two from now, we realize that merge can't happen before, I don't know, March or April of next year anyway, then we could always kind of like revisit this decision. But I think at least there seems to be very universal kind of community buy-in to really prioritize the merge, and I don't think any potential features for Shanghai are like important enough to even justify delaying the merge for just let's say a month or so. So I personally strongly kind of like agree with kind of committing to Shanghai as the merge, but I also just very briefly wanted to say on the London side, on what that means for London. I think there's at least a case to be made for like some of these nice to have ERPs that are small, for example, the base fee, to then be included in London. I think there's like a strong case there because again, the next feature fork might be quite a far way out. I think it's more complicated for other ERPs. So for example, I mean, I'm one of the co-champions of like one of the bigger ERPs that is potentially considered for London. I think there's definitely a case that there's just no time because of the tight schedule for London. But I would maybe at least propose that we were to kind of like just go ahead with any potential ERPs for London as long as we think we might be on track timeline-wise. And then once we see that it's just like basically we were running out of time, we can always kind of like go with like a more core version of London. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
And Mika,
since we're at time, I was going to ask a question, but I was going to ask a question, but I'll phrase the statement instead to avoid inciting discussion. The question is do we actually have a spec for ETH1 or application clients to go implement, or is it still just in the heads of ETH2 core devs? If it's not, then I feel like we really shouldn't be talking about the merge until we have something that ETH1 clients can actually look at and implement.
So I think the challenge there is that we have more and more, and we need to have ETH1 client involvement. Sorry, somebody else was speaking.
Yeah. I was just going to say that currently we don't have the spec as a document. Rather that we only have the proof of concept. But yeah, we are working on the spec actively now. So and likely see the spec for the application layer like in the next quarter. So.
So would be interested to hear like what in the current proposals is not yet specified, because it actually does seem to me to be pretty specific, but we can move the conversation offline.
Yeah, I'd echo that.
Yeah, so I think just because we're already a bit over time.
I do want to announce we will be doing a bi-weekly semi-public call. Won't be shared. Won't be streamed or anything. To discuss the merge from an engineering perspective and kind of dig in, and that would be on the Thursday prior to the all core devs call. So 2 weeks from yesterday, and we are looking for say an engineer from most teams to sprint on merge testnets from mid-April to mid-May. That would be along with the ETH Global Scaling Hackathon. So if you do have an engineer on your team who's interested in getting involved, that's something that we're going to be discussing in the coming weeks.
Okay, so I guess just to kind of summarize and wrap up. So I think for today, for London, we haven't included anything beyond 1559 and the difficulty bomb pushback. And then the big conversation we need to think through is, what do we do with regards to Shanghai for the merge and for and that affects what we do for London and all the other kind of features. And that can be obviously the main topic of the next All-Core Devs. Light Client has a comment about breakout sessions. I'm not sure. To me, it feels like we don't need one breakout session as much as just this general conversation about the merge versus Shanghai, and that the different EAPs should probably the different EAPs that were proposed for London or Shanghai should probably keep doing their work and trying to get it ready. But that ideally at the next call we can kind of make a decision about what the scope is for Shanghai. Sorry, that was kind of a ramble, but basically next call, try to figure out what do we do about the merge in Shanghai, and consequently what goes into London. And over the next 2 weeks, just try to keep having those conversations, which I guess will kind of culminate with the merge call 2 weeks from now. That'll be the day before All Core Devs. Does that make sense for everybody? Any final comments, thoughts?
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Well, congrats, Tim, on your very first well-managed call.
Yeah,
Claps.
We made it.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, team.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye, Dylan.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Hey, guys.
guys.